Hi, folks. Okay, again, we were having a little bit of audio difficulties. We apologize, but thank you very much for joining us for this afternoon. We're going to try to get started here, and we're going to start off with well, first of all, I want to let you know if you would like to follow along with the slides, here's a URL that you can use. You can download the slides right now. This will force a copy, and so therefore you can do whatever you need to do with your copy of the slides. I will be emailing these out at the conclusion of the networking meeting also, so don't worry about it if you can't get it right now. But let's go ahead and begin. And I want to start with this picture here. As we know, this has been a very fluid situation, right, with Illinois Empower and ESSA and the Illinois Quality Framework and everything else. So here's a question, and we want you to, if you could, please answer this in the chat box. How should we and our schools respond in the face of all these ongoing changes? Take a few minutes to think about that, and then go ahead and respond in the chat box, please. Okay, Brandy says embrace the changes. I like that. I wish I could have that mindset all the time. Jessica says celebrate your strengths, but look for ways as a team to address improvements. Ardella says continue to move forward, but be flexible. That's absolutely right. We don't have another option here, do we? John Randich says we should be a resource to schools to assist them with analyzing school data and reflect on the IQF. Absolutely. Lori Finello, go with the flow. Since it's a planning year, be adaptable. That's a great point. This is a planning year. Angie Garcia, constant communication, ask questions and share findings. We're definitely trying to do that with you and with our districts, no doubt about it. As much as we can, we're getting in touch with Illinois Empower and Ralph Grimm and others to get all the latest information. Nancy Broadbeck says, continue to listen to the needs of the schools. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Okay, Gail Wright says, plant the seeds. Thank you. Plant the seeds to look at the possibilities to improve teaching and learning. Mark, determine how the changes fit in your mission and vision. Ooh, I like that. Find the ways to incorporate what makes sense and not simply for the sake of change. Great message that we're trying to get all of our districts to adopt. No doubt about it. Okay. So why don't we move forward to our next slide. And again, we're here for our second networking session. We're pretty darn excited about this. There will be a number of us presenting today. We're going to have Diane Betts, who's the Assistant Executive Director from North Cook. Myself, Mike Chernyavsky, I'm the School Improvement Specialist at West 40. And Jill Ewer, who is the ELA Curriculum Specialist from South Cook. And we'll be picking up at different times here. This is what we're planning on covering today, and this is based on what we read from your comments. Thank you very much to those of you who took the time to fill out the survey. These are the things that you said you wanted to discuss with us today and to share with one another across the state. Where have we been so far? What's the latest from Illinois Empower, and how does that impact us? And what's the latest from IARSS? Also, a lot of you are beginning to work on the Illinois Quality Framework and supporting rubric with your districts. So we wanted to share with you some ideas that we've been using here and also hear from some other folks from across the state. And then if there are any additional resources that we can share with you and that you all can share with us, we would love to have that happen all throughout this afternoon, okay? So why don't we continue here? And let's talk a little bit about where we've been at this point. So far, all 38 of the ROEs and ISCs have been trained in the TSIP process, and we find that to be very exciting. That's great news. Thank you all for taking part in all of this. It's been quite a journey, and we're excited to be on it with you. There have been 99 different people who have been trained, so that's pretty incredible. All across the state, almost actually over 100 of us if you include the ISC staff. And we've been able, as a result of this, we are able to reach and support the students all across the state. We're looking at over 1.5 million students that we're helping out. That is really incredible. So thank you all very much for what you're doing there. Really appreciate that on behalf of the kids. So let's take a quick peek at some of the survey results. Again, thank you very much to those of you who were able to take part in the survey. This definitely helps us make sure we're delivering the information that you want that's going to be most helpful for you. This bit of data shows us where your ROEs are at in the process so far when it comes to supporting your schools with Illinois Empower. As you can see, the vast majority of us, 81%, are still working on making contacts with the schools. And I don't think this just means that we're, in our initial outreach. I think we're still trying to develop those relationships. I know certainly we could say that in West Cook and North Cook and South Cook. We're really trying to solidify that. Some of us, about a third of us, are already supporting the underperforming schools in different ways. Another, about a third of us, again, have scheduled trainings for TSIP already. And a smaller number, around 14%, have delivered some TSIP trainings. And I think that's taking a variety of different formats. For example, I know I was with the Rock Island ROE recently, and they had provided a pretty nice event with superintendents across their area, superintendents and principals and other educational leaders. And they were really discussing what ESSA means for their area and how they're going to handle the Illinois Quality Framework and things like that. So it's not just the initial TSIP trainings that we've all talked about before, additional things related to Illinois Empower and school improvement. And we want to take a quick break here and again ask you to do some things in the chat box here and write down when you've been trying to develop these relationships and get people on board and make sure that they know that the support is out there. What are some of the innovative things that you've tried? What's something new or innovative that you've tried to support your schools? Please go ahead and fill that out in the chat box.
So thank you to the few of you that have written in the chat box. Lori Finella wrote about having work group times. I think it was on a weekly basis with schools that are, I'm assuming those are designated schools. Hallie is talking about dividing up our underperforming schools list and making direct contact with the district and school admins to offer support. John Randich talked about at one of our ESSA support meetings, one of our schools presented their data and shared how to get from the raw scores to the indicator score. So great ideas. Thank you. It sounds as if this idea of many of the ROE offices are having meetings and inviting in the schools that are designated and calling them ESSA support meetings. So not only are you providing support to those schools, it sounds as if the schools are providing support to one another as well as they continue on this journey. Angie Garza talks about administrator meetings, team meetings with follow-up and district coaching support, reviewing completed work prior to submission, and working with schools that feed into targeted schools. That's a great idea where you may have a middle school that is the designated schools. If we can also be working with those elementary schools that feed into that middle school, be looking at their data and thinking about how do we help support school improvement across the whole system. I think one of the big ideas we want to keep getting across to our schools is that idea that systemic school improvement isn't just about working with those schools that have been designated, but really thinking about working with all schools to improve learning and achievement for all students. So we want to move on and talk a little bit about the latest on Illinois designated schools and Illinois Empower. You see here on the, hopefully you should see on your screen, I've put up the due dates that we have received from ISB. So this is both for the Iowa's application, the IQF, the work plan, the selection of the learning partners, and then the end of the year grant activities. These are all dates that ISBE has been sharing with us. And what we have heard as of today is that each step of this, the application, the IQF, and the work plan does need local board approval. Now, with that said, we've had some conversation with ISB where they have said that, let's say, for example, a school is ready to submit their application next week on November 29th. They can go ahead and do that. And then present it to their board at their regularly scheduled meeting. Let's say their next board meeting is December 6th and get the board approval post facto. So while these dates are listed here, in some cases, particularly for this first one, for the Iowa's application, as soon as you can get the application in is when they can turn it around and get it approved and start spending the money, so that board approval could follow the actual submission to ISB. But these are the dates that you do see. Next slide, final designations. I'm sure as we were here in the Cook County area, you might also have been surprised by some of the designations that changed as of the official designation list on October 31st. The numbers that you see here on the slide, I think, are as accurate as I can gather. Currently, we have 204 lowest performing schools. This list was 193 schools in July, so that actually went up a little bit. But here was the bigger surprise. We went from 787 underperforming schools in July to 561 underperforming in October. So a decline across the state, which I think we probably saw in all 6 of our areas. And it wasn't always as clear as you might think it might be. I, for one, had a district that had one middle school that had been on the early list. That came off and was now commendable, but their other middle school went on the underperforming list. So some changes and surprises at the school level. So one of the questions we want to ask next is, what have been some of the challenges that you've been facing given these new designations? If you could type into the chat box some of the challenges that you've been facing as you start to work with these schools and their new designations, we would appreciate that. Thank you. So use the chat box to type in.
I think I might have fixed it.
Thank you for whoever commented that the slides were not moving forward. So I do want to go back to, and hopefully you can now see on yours, if you've got your computer, if you're using logged in through your computer, you can see the due dates. These are no different from what we've been kind of sharing throughout the past several weeks. So November 30th is the application deadline for the Iowa's application. January 31st for the needs assessment, the IQF. Supporting rubric is due in Iowa's on January 31st, February 28th for the work plan, and February 28th is also the date that a district is supposed to be selecting their learning partner if they're going to be using that one. And remember that underperforming schools may choose to use a learning partner. Lowest performing schools have to choose a learning partner to use. And then they have until the end of June 30th of 2019 to be working on the activities. Somebody did comment that there's little time to really do this work thoughtfully and thoroughly. I think we need to keep thinking, though, that this is our planning year. And keep that in mind, or at least we hope most of our schools have chosen to use this as a planning year. So they really have between now through June 30th to be thinking about their data, what it's telling them, what they want to do about it, and to develop their school improvement plan. And if they have some ideas down that they're putting in February on their work plan and it changes as they move forward between then and the end of the year, that's okay. They just go back in and amend their plan to show the changes that they're making, both in terms of perhaps SMART goals or in terms of the activities that they're using and how they're using their dollars. Keep in mind that the work plan is not their very specific action plan. It's just a broad overview of their initial planning, their thinking and their initial planning. So yes, it's somewhat of a short timeline, but it does not have to be thought of as that everything is written in stone. This can be evolving and changing as we move forward. Nancy Broadbrack made a great comment in the chat box about understanding that there is little security in a commendable designation. And I'm going to, in a minute, open up the mic for Nancy to talk a little bit further about that. But I think that's one of the things to be thinking about as you're working with schools, is really to be looking at their raw scores, their indicator scores, and their index scores to see how far they may be from missing the mark or making the mark. So just because a school is labeled commendable this year, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be looking at school improvement efforts and thinking about how each subgroup performed as well as all of their students. Okay, so if we could unmute Nancy Broadbeck. I'd like her she's from the Decatur area, to talk a little bit about how she's been working with some of the schools in her area to understand ESSA in its totality, their designation, and how they might respond. Nancy, you should be on.
Hi there, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thank you. We sent out an email to the 3 school districts in our region that have the designation of underperforming or lowest performing. We have Decatur Public Schools in our region, so we have several schools that we need to be working with if we can at all. Traditionally, we have not been the first choice for Decatur because they receive a lot of grant money. However, the Illinois Empower representative for our region contacted us and asked, after we sent the email, asking, what our plan was to support these schools. So we met with her and then held a meeting with the principals of the buildings. Actually, for Decatur, we met with their curriculum people and their grants people, just to lay out how we can support them, showing them how to dig down into the data so that they can look at those student groups that are on the bubble, so to speak, and making them aware that that commendable designation is not necessarily a security, that they should be prepared to really have a group of teachers ready to look at what changes will come down as a result of the changes in the percentages that affect those levels for next year's designations. We also met with all of the region's superintendents and encouraged them to send their principals, building principals, and other administrators to our meeting. And that's where we learned that there was not necessarily pushback, but not necessarily buy-in from those schools that did have that commendable designation, because they feel pretty confident and they felt that they really didn't have to worry about this year because they were going to move on to other things. We do have one school district who had the designation of underperforming that has chosen not to do anything at all with this year. They feel they're not going to need anyone's services to correct the problem. So that will be interesting. We're going to continue to reach out to them as time goes on.
Thank you, Nancy, for sharing. I also would like to open the mic up to Hallie from Brenzewski from the PDA up in the Joliet area, because she spoke about using some other ISB support in order to really help schools understand their index scores. So Hallie, if you're on, if you could speak about that, please.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. This we learned from, we have what's called ESSA support group meetings, where we bring and invite people in to talk about what they're doing in their schools and districts, give them some latest and greatest information, but really to provide some networking opportunities for our schools. And one of our schools who was in attendance at our last meeting shared with us that she scheduled a 1-hour call with Ray Clement, and you can do this, any schools can do this by emailing her assistant or just by calling. The number is 217-782-4823. You could set up this 1-hour meeting. We're so impressed because this admin felt that she can't go to each of her schools that were designated and speak intelligently if she didn't really understand the data used to determine their school's designation. So on this call with Ray has the school's individual data in front of her, and then the admin would have that, all the numbers as well in front of them, and she really walked them through it so they could really understand it. So she'll explain the school's designations, formulas used to determine those designations. She walks them through the indicator score report, and that's comprised of the raw performance calculations and indicator score calculation. And then she just explains to them how these subgroups were determined. So it's nice for them to understand the scores of their subgroup, but also the calculations of all other groups as well, because they can see how close they are, where to focus services for subgroups that are not yet the reason they're being designated, but might be close. So they can really see where they're really excelling and where they need to focus some more effort. So he highly recommended that schools set up that appointment to talk with Ray.
Thanks so much, Hallie.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sure. And then just during these ESSA support group meetings, we just scheduled 4 every other month, 4 total so far. And John Randich leads that up for us. He does a great job. But what we do is we share the timelines, the applications, talk about designations, funding, the framework, of course, the planning your work plans, all these types of things. But again, we're really finding that these schools, admins that are coming together are really helping each other. So we really set that up. And of course, at the end, it's a little promo on what we can do as far as TSIP to support these schools as well.
Great. So it sounds as if not only are you providing support to the schools and giving them information, but they're learning from one another as well through these ESSA support meetings.
Absolutely.
The other comment that I'd like to make is if you can't get a hold of Ray Clements to kind of walk your school or your office through the scores, the latest, I believe it was sometime recently in November, Ray Clements did a webinar that was part of the Illinois Assessment Listserv that was very straightforward, really directing schools how to use those raw scores, those indicator scores, and those indicator scores in order to be thinking about where each subgroup fell and how close they were to the target. So if you can't get a hold of Ray directly, I would encourage you to look for that webinar because it was very well done. So I think we're going to try to move on, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Mike, and he's going to talk about the latest with IARSS as it relates to Illinois Empower.
Hi, everybody. Let's go through. We don't have a whole lot here to share with you right now, but we know that there have been a lot of questions, a lot of things that people were hoping to get information from about IARSS. And so we just have a few bullet points to talk about, really. The first is that, in case you didn't already know, IARSS, which includes all of us, we are approved as learning partners for all 3 of the priority areas. So governance and management, climate and culture, and teaching and learning. We are approved to provide support in all 3. You can go to that URL that you see on the screen right now to see more about that. Also, I don't know if everybody saw this, but our good friend here, Susie Deese, did this promotional video here about, why should you choose us? Why should you choose IARSS as a learning partner? And I don't think we're going to watch it right now, but definitely take a look. It's roughly 5 minutes long, and it's really well done. There's some really nice video, great text around it. My favorite is one reason why.
We know you and we get you.
We know you and we get you. I know I'm making light of it, but I actually really did like that. I thought that was really nice. But it's really well done, and definitely take a look at it. There's some really good language in there that can help. Also, many of us were wondering about a contract agreement template, and Kevin Seymour sent that out recently. That's the bottom bullet point that you see there. And once you click on that link, it looks like this. It's pretty nice to have this here. It's got all of the legalese that you need. You can see the parts in red are the ones that you're going to want to make some changes to based on whatever the partner is that the district is that you are partnering with, school name, that sort of thing. It's very easy to follow along with, and you don't have to worry about any of the, if you have the right legal language or anything like that. It's all in here, and that makes it really nice. So I know we didn't answer all the questions that you have, and also I'm sure that you're getting a ton of questions from your districts. One thing that we're hearing a lot of, for example, is what happens if a school is underperforming this year, but next year they're commendable? Do they still get the funds? I'm sure you're getting tons of those questions. What we would like to do, we have a great opportunity coming up. The ISCs are going to be meeting with a team of folks from Illinois Empower pretty soon. And one thing we asked them if we could do is, could we bring our frequently asked questions that we're getting from districts across the state to you? And can you give us some solid answers here about what those different things are? So they're looking forward to getting our list of questions. And we wanted to open this up to all of you and see what the questions are that you're getting. And we want to make sure that we can bring all of those questions to the Illinois Empower staff when we meet with them pretty soon. And we're looking at the 30th at the moment. So please go ahead in the chat box, type in the questions that you're getting from your districts, whatever they are, and we'll make sure we can pass those on. Oh, Lori's asking a good question here. If we can have representatives from other ROEs. I don't see why we couldn't do that. I'll certainly ask. This is actually going to be a go-to meeting, or at least that's the way it's looking. So I imagine we could do that. I will definitely ask and find out. Ooh, Hallie says there's lots of questions about homeschooling. Well, that's interesting. And how to handle chronic absenteeism. Good questions. I know earlier people were wondering how chronic absenteeism is defined, and thankfully that was covered in one of the recent webinars. Benchmarks and timelines for coming off the list. That's a great question. Can schools use the grant money during the year of planning to hire ISCs as consultants? And do schools get the $15K for the year of planning? The answer to both of those actually is yes. They can definitely use ISCs with these funds, as long as they're used in a way that is consistent with the needs of the parameters of the grant. And the schools do get $15,000 a year for preliminary designations, and then another $15,000 for summative if they're underperforming. Any other questions that you're getting? When the grade for growth will be implemented? That's a good question. We have not heard about a timeline for that yet. I know in our area, we've had some people questioning what actually needs board approval and what doesn't. And we're definitely seeking clarification on that as well. Oh, here's another one. There would be some were told there would be a possibility of additional $15,000 for next semester. Brandy, that is the very first time I've heard that, but we can certainly ask that question. What counts as a school day? Ah, well, you're hearing lots of laughter here. There's brand new information about that. I don't know if we want to. I don't feel that I'm in a position to really be the spokesperson around that. I don't know enough about that. But
There was a guidance document that was developed that we could post and share.
We will post that guidance document as soon as we can, so you have some information about that. Any other questions?
You could talk about the roadshow, because that's directly.
Good point. Susie just mentioned that some of the folks from ISB are going on another roadshow, and I think that's the first week of December. And the main focus of that is supposed to be about the new definition of the school day and how that's going to work. And I don't remember all the locations, but they are spread out across the state. There should be, I think it was Quincy, Galesburg, Wheaton, and there are two more. We'll get that to you. We know the places, Carbondale, but we don't know the exact dates or times. We'll make sure that we put that out as soon as we get that information. All right. Well, if you think of any other questions as we're going through today, please feel free to pop those up in the chat box. We're going to capture the chat log, and again, we're going to be sharing this with the Illinois Empower people. So this is an opportunity to get your questions answered directly, which is pretty great. Okay, why don't we move now over to the supporting your districts with the Illinois Quality Framework. This is an area that many people said that they're just about to move into. So our intention was to provide you with a little bit of information right now, some support, some resources and ideas to get you ready to do this work, which should be happening, probably right now. I'm going to turn this over. We're going to try again with Jill in South Cook. Jill, are you there?
I'm here.
All right. Take it away, Jill.
Okay, so at South Cook, we started right away with the Illinois Quality Framework. We were realizing that the school's ability to look at this framework from a really global perspective and how to focus in their efforts, we weren't quite sure that they would know where to start and how to handle that. And then we decided that we should do some Illinois Quality Framework workshops with them, some professional development, and focusing on how to understand what the framework is. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in these next few slides and give you some insight on our process and our focus. So within the Illinois Quality Framework, we were really wanting to make sure that everybody understood this as this global vision that is going to bring into a narrow focus. We were wanting districts to understand that when they're trying to look at global school improvement, we wanted them to look at all areas and not just focus on one and say, okay, we know what the problem is, let's go there. This was a way, the quality framework was a nice tool to give them this just global perspective before they started to narrow it down. And we were really working on how to have some of those collaborative conversations. When we scheduled our trainings, we had people from many different buildings all in one training. We didn't always focus it on just one school or one district. This way they could benefit from the communication along with all different schools. Okay, and so the difference between the framework and the rubric was discussed. We talked all about that. We made sure that everybody understood the framework and the rubric as in its entirety and how they each support each other and how the rubric leads to going deeper within each of those areas. So at South Cook, to give you a little bit of a perspective of what we were working with, we had 5 cohorts of training sessions. Each cohort consisted of 2 half-day trainings and a virtual networking in between those 2 trainings. We're in the midst of that. We haven't completed any of them. All of our day 1s are done, and our networking is about to happen for those. What happened when we had that first slide with that little veered off path in there, we experienced some of that because we initially had 50 schools scheduled. And then those summative designations came out, and some of our schools dropped off of the underperforming ranking. We initially had 74 schools that were underperforming, and now we have 31 that were underperforming. We initially had 50 schools registered for our cohorts, and each of those schools were allowed to bring up to 8 people. And then we actually trained 43. We had a few that dropped off, and then we had a few that came back on. Some of them who came off of the underperforming list actually decided to stay on, even though that they were now designated as commendable. And so we're going to talk a little bit here about the process on what that looks like. We started with some really early and prompt communication that included communication in a bunch of different ways. We had an initial letter that went out just to all of our designated schools to inform them about those trainings, but then also give them the opportunity that we can come on site and walk you through this. This was a little bit of an uncomfortable and different type of process that some of our schools were receiving designations that they weren't really comfortable with. So they needed somebody to talk that through with that. We walked them through the whole process and really left it up to them. Do you feel like you need more work with this? Some of our districts felt like we can handle the Illinois Quality Framework, but we're going to tap in when you get to the Targeted School Improvement Plan. And we were fine with that. We wanted to make sure that when we were going to them, that we were coming from that service point of view, and we're here to help them, and we all have that same mutual goal for school improvement. Another thing that we looked at was really honoring the previous work that has already been done. Some of our districts who have been required to do some types of school improvement planning didn't really want to look at it as, oh, we have to do this whole process over again. We've already started this. So we wanted to make sure that we were letting them know that their work that they've done previously, even if it was with other providers, we're going to honor that work and build upon it, not ask them to just scrap all that hard work that they've done and start a new process again. And I feel at South Cook, a lot of this was we were building upon relationships that we've already created with our schools. Our schools are really wanting to have upfront and honest conversations about their status. They come to us with questions. We usually found out about their status before it became public to us. They were contacting us and saying, this is our designation. How can you help? What can we do? And this was really helping coming through this established credibility that we were able to have at South Cook. We have been a resource for them, just like a lot of our other ROEs and ISCs in supporting them. So they know that we're somebody that they can reach out right away to. I'm going to tell you a little bit now about what we actually did at the training. When we had our schools there, we wanted to make sure that there was a very clear understanding of what the standards were. There's a lot to each of those standards and the indicators and the elements and the levels of performance, and it could just really get overwhelming. So we had them jigsaw. We mixed them with other schools so that they can get different understandings from other areas to be able to understand that standard. So they did a jigsaw and a poster creation of a summary of the standard. After they did the summary of the standard, they moved into brainstorming what are potential pieces of evidence that we would want to provide to our stakeholders. And as you can see in that slide, there are different colors. Different groups were adding on to that, because then after that we started a carousel, and all the other groups that did the other standards would visit each standard, learn a little bit about that standard from the poster walk, and then add to the potential evidence. In addition to potential evidence, we had our burning questions section. This was talking about what types of questions come to mind right away that you need with this. As you can see by all the different colors, every group that visited, they kept adding more and more burning questions to that. What we did for a lot of these burning questions was kept a running frequently asked questions. So all 5 of our cohorts were able to see what were the questions, and then we provided the answers whenever we were able to give an answer. Sometimes there weren't any answers for that. In effort to make sure that all of our districts left with a clear vision and plan on what their next steps were, we implemented an action plan. So this is a just a little typable format where they can go in and enter what does the quality example look like. They were pulling statements right from those posters because they already gave their summary on there and their potential evidence, but this was going to be district specific now. Before, the potential evidence was general because there were multiple schools involved. So this potential evidence is school specific. Each school is writing in there, what are the exact pieces of evidence that we may have? Who were the stakeholders that they were going to identify to bring together for each of these standards? What are the roles and responsibilities of the people within there? And what is our timeline to be able to meet and those kinds of things? We were really wanting to make sure how to give our participants the opportunity to plan so that when they left our professional development, they didn't have to schedule another meeting to plan, that they were ready to go after that. And then this is just a larger view. Sorry, I should have had that up last one. Giving them an idea of what they can do for each individual indicator. And on the next slide, we have some resources that West 40 created, and I know Mike mentioned those in the link section, that there were links available there. So the Quick Start Guide is really looking at the format of what can happen in regards to professional development and going through the process for the Illinois Quality Framework. And then the supporting rubric process for the groups. How can you go through each group, giving them some steps and guidance on how to determine, how to look at the evidence and determine ratings for the evidence. And here are the links for those two documents here. Okay, so we have an opportunity for some feedback here. What plans do you have for for supporting schools with the Illinois Quality Framework? If you can type your message in the chat box, and we'll watch for some responses. So I'm not seeing anything, right? I'm like, I hear crickets, nobody's responding. Does that mean that we don't have plans for that, or that you're already in the process? If you can kind of give me any bit of a clue here that you haven't planned for doing any professional development for the Illinois Quality Framework, or maybe your schools have already completed it prior to being able to give them that opportunity. Okay, here's some things. Thank you, Angie. Okay, very good. So Angie says that they've already implemented trainings and most of their schools are moving forward with their coaching support. At West 40, we've piloted it with one of our larger districts and have a couple districts using us in this capacity as well. Okay. I'm going to refer back to one of the comments that was on here earlier, and this was John from the Joliet PDA, and he mentioned when we were talking, when there was chat box opportunities earlier, we as ISCs and ROEs are looking to schools to assist them with analyzing the school data and reflect on the Illinois Quality Framework. That's what we're really looking to do for our second session for the Illinois Quality Framework. How do we take the recommendations from our stakeholders and move forward and prioritize which ones of these standards are really going to be an area of focus to be able to put into that work plan? Okay. Spending a lot of time with common clarity of language and expectations in the rubric. Okay, good. Okay, So we are going to get ready to wrap up. I have one more final thing to talk about, and we're bringing that back to our initial slide here when we had this little path that's gone off the road where we really felt like we were moving on a good direction, and then we had a lot of our schools' designations change. And how were we continuing to support those schools? And someone touched on that earlier, one of our people that called in, and looking at our schools, well, you're at the commendable level right now, but let's look a little bit deeper at your data and see what we can do to keep you at commendable, or if how close you were to becoming underperforming, or sometimes in that case, even the lowest performing. Okay, so I just wanted to thank everybody for being here today. As always, all of the ISCs are here to support you guys. Please let us know, and we'll continue to reach out through the listserv. And everybody should have that email. And if you can fill out the evaluation that was in the slides, thank you. Please give us some feedback, and then we know how to best meet your needs in the future. Thank you, everybody.